Okay, those words, you're live. Cool. Back on YouTube doing a therapy Q&A. I enjoyed it last week. I want to do a few. I want to do a few more and just try to be of service. Big news for the week. I ran a workshop. Yes. I mean, it used to totally not be news for a long time up until the COVID kind of times. I was just running workshop after workshop and was kind of workshopped out and in a sense kind of grateful for the COVID interruption. But then, workshops kind of declined and during those times, of course. And but now I'm back running them. So I ran a one-day workshop called Trauma in the Body in Tbilisi, here in Tbilisi in Georgia, and that went down pretty good. Had 19 people turn up, Georgians, and working for translator and all of this kind of thing. Kind of funny at times. I say a few words and she rattles on for quite a while. I'm like, I wonder what she's saying. But it was good to do it. And what was so exciting about doing it here, I found, was that people are just super into it. They just get into it because there's no one else really doing this kind of work in this part of the world. Most therapy is restricted to kind of richer areas of Europe, the UK, America, that kind of thing, and that there isn't so much going on in other places. And so it was exciting to run something and see people's enthusiasm and that they were super up for it. And even some people came who were university professors of psychology or, regular psychotherapists. And I know in the UK, without being too mean, if I get those kind of guys in the group room, they're very cerebral. They don't really want to just jump right into some kind of body-based process. But these Georgian guys were just super up for it. They were just super up for it, and that was inspiring to me. Anyway, the guy booked me, who runs the center, to book me for another 4 workshops. So one session and 3 more workshops. So that's all pretty cool. In fact, I have to make sure I don't start working too hard, really. People kind of want to do some in-person one-to-ones. I have to make sure I'm not overdraining myself with that stuff. And getting old and all that shit. Well, I noticed over time that when it comes to running big, heavy emotional release sessions, I can do it. But in the old days, I would wing things a bit more. I would kind of I'd be in the group room and we're putting stuff out and we're going through it and I'm leading stuff and I'm not really winging it completely, but I haven't really got enough assistance to really feel like, wow, I've really got this space held. And one of the things here in Georgia, because I'm getting offered to do longer workshops, but I don't have any assistance here. And to be honest, there's, unless you've kind of been in the scene for a while or something, it's hard to find people who've got the experience with this kind of work. It is radical and different. It coexists alongside regular mainstream therapy, but it is not the same. I mean, it is just really not the same. And having a PhD in clinical psychology don't mean jack in the group room, basically. No disrespect to people who've got PhDs in clinical psychology. It's just not the same. You're not just going straight into the emotional body like we are in the group room and getting stuff out. So I'm always excited by, running workshops, and particularly longer workshops where you can really get in there. And by day 2, day 3, people have loosened up a lot. They've come, if it's a residential workshop, then they've kind of, they've dropped a lot of the usual reference points in their mind. Maybe they're getting a little bit bored of sneaking onto their phone or whatever, and they start to give it up a bit. The group energy builds, people's natural trust in each other starts to build. And then, they start to let go. Everybody wants to let go of the past on some level or do their best attempt to do so, but it is fundamentally a trust issue. It's about being in space, starting to trust, sometimes seeing other people do it, and then it's like, fuck it, I'm gonna let this go somewhere. And it can be such a powerful thing. It's so it's one of those things, and when it starts to take off, people get into it. The school where I learned in Holland, I mean, there were just hundreds of people into it at that time, back in the late 90s, because it just developed this huge energy where, people are just feeding off each other. And you've got a whole social scene, developing around it as well. But also it's like this, people can let it go. They can let the stuff go. And in these big groups, it can really happen on a deep level. And of course, you always need to keep working at it a bit, but I don't know, the world has taken such a different kind of turn post-COVID. I heard this expression, dude, you're so 2019, meaning like someone who just accepts uncritically any kind of narrative out of the Western media or whatever, and it's like referring to the fact that there's been this kind of huge event, particularly in Western culture, with the COVID lockdowns and vaccinations and all of that stuff. And it has left a significant number of people, much more than ever before, because I was in conspiracy scene back in the 90s and stuff. And it's left a lot more people questioning. And I think that's basically a healthy process. Just have to hope it moves into a sort of into a deeper internal process. Humans have so much potential. I've been reading what am I reading? Nietzsche. I never read Nietzsche before, but I've been listening to some guys. I listened to this guy, Daniel Kazanjian. Maybe it's an Armenian name, I don't know. Could even be Georgian, but he's an interesting guy. He's a mate of another guy I know, Pete Lindbergh over in Canada, and he interviews people, and he's been interviewing a few different kind of men's coaches who are really they get into a fiery thing, and they often talk about Nietzsche. And I thought, well, I never read Nietzsche, so I should read some Nietzsche. So I've been reading Was Spake Zarathustra, and also listening to Osho's discourses on it, which aren't as good as his older discourses, because it's like a couple of years before he keeled over and died, really, and you can tell he's quite weak. But it's still some interesting shit there about getting out into the world and just giving what you can, while you can, this basic love of humanity, which I still, for myself, I do feel it, just on the street, this basic love of people and just seeing the potential inside people that's there, it's so untapped. Okay, let's be a host. And Kristen, nice to hear from you. Long time. Cool, I hope you're doing good. And Sol, hi Deb, is there a good resource for couples where the partners have a very different character structure? How do we navigate those differences? Well, to be honest, like most of these kind of psychological maps that you can use to look at yourself, couples aren't all that often in the same kind of category anyway, depending, even whatever the map is, whether it's like astrology or the Enneagram or, attachment theory or whatever. Attachment theory is an excellent example, and likewise with character structure, it's pretty normal, because we tend, it's in the psyche really, what we find most attractive in a partner usually is that we perceive them as embodying a quality we can't give ourselves. I remember being on this group many, many years ago, and we had to write out attributes of our ideal partner, and I wrote out about this crazy Hispanic woman or something, and afterwards the workshop leader said to me, you're just afraid of letting yourself go a bit more fucking crazy, and I could get it. That was why that type of woman was so attractive to me at that time, because I didn't believe, I was so much under control, I didn't believe that I could give myself my kind of crazy wild side. So then I got it, and that's what fired the attraction. So in couples, that's quite common, and even in character structure, there's very common kind of oral to rigid, or endurer to aggressive. That's a really extreme one. But there's lots of stuff, I think what's useful is to read, books on character structure, and just to have a basic grasp of those kind of things. And, it is, relationships are nourishing and challenging, it's a good relationship. What's great is when both individuals in the couple, really want to work on themselves in one way or the other. It helps things along. And I mean, what doesn't work in relationships ever, being a therapist, is therapizing in relationships, that's a total disaster. I had some friends once when I was doing a lot of therapist work, and they were both therapists. They were going out with each other. And then whenever I would see them for a beer or whatever, or around their flat, they'd both be banging on about how the other one's still not resolved their mother issues and da 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 da. And I just think, God, you don't want to. That's no use doing that stuff. You have to just be real. I feel this. It's like that's what it comes back to. And for sure, attachment theory is the classic one where they go into couple relationships with the avoidant and the what do they call them? Anxious. The anxious avoidant. Which is kind of the oral versus the oral getting attached to the rigid in a certain way. Typically rigid males and oral females. But it's not exact correspondence perhaps, but it's similar. There's a lot of good books. Attached is a good book by some guy. Amir something, is it, or surname Amir? Not really sure, but that's a good book on understanding attachment theory, which can be very revealing for couples because there's so much of it going on in our interdynamics. I'd recommend that one. It's one of those American psychological books that the first chapter contains all the meat and good stuff, and then you can tell the commissioning editor is like, I got to pan it out for another 200 pages with some case studies and whatever. It's kind of how it goes. But navigating dynamics in couple is exciting as well, because I think inevitably couples get a bit stuck at some point, in your relating, and it's like, what are we going to do to break through that? And if nothing comes to break through it, either they both get turned off, start finding other partners, or just collapse inside themselves, or they break up, basically, And I think that is a shame, because I think a lot of relationships could go on a lot longer with some decent kind of, work together that you can do on a psychological, emotional level. Anyway, that's couples. And I think what's kind of interesting these days is there's just so more, or it seems like that anyway, there just seem to be so many more single people, rather than couples, like myself included. It's like people are kind of anxious to get in a couple again. It's like it's scary. It's scary to be. I think people are more open on the surface these days than they were when I was younger. And then it is scary. So it tends to sort of go that all the super alpha men chase after the super alpha women, and the super alpha women chase after the super alpha men. So the top kind of 10% on that way of measuring, they just end up getting off of each other and having relationships and babies. And then the others are increasingly kind of left, I think, just like, okay, do I take a risk to really go after other people? It's like, I see we're in a kind of relationship crisis somewhere post-COVID and probably before in the West. It's like quite a big deal, I think. What do people want? We're in this phase of huge transition. I think, the body should come back, basically, because there is this part of the kind of Western dynamic where it's just like the mind trying to leave the body. It's just trying to leave the body because there is this part of the human ego, it doesn't like being constrained by this body, especially as it gets older, and it just wants to be free, it wants to be free of the body. And, so it's trying, with technology and whatever to get free of the body. And I don't think that's a healthy position. Nietzsche also, Prospect Zarathustra, kind of interesting on that, where he's saying it all comes back to the body, or the character of Zarathustra in the book, that it's all about the body, and I totally agree. It's not about escaping the body and kind of going off into this mental fantasy world. And I'm kind of skeptical whether a lot of these kind of Neuralink things and AI things are really going to work as well. That's the scene I follow a little bit, and I don't know that they're going to work like people kind of hope they will. I don't think that's reality. I think we need to come back to the body, or we'll be driven back to the body somewhere, and and start to get on with things and start to develop ourselves. It's like, on some level, the world is kind of crazy because we have this immense inner resource within us. But to get in there, to get into this inner world, we have to go through what we fear, which is basically what we've repressed. And we're born in that. In fact, we probably maybe even exist in it prior to being born. But then, when we get born, and then the brain pushes all this stuff down according to our cultural programming, and that is basically that. And most people will go through their life without ever opening that doorway up. And it's kind of crazy because, it's deep, and I feel like I'm only just starting to get in there. I think one of the things I've been most kind of moved by in my own therapeutic journey of late is the degree to which in the past I haven't felt my back, particularly my lower back. Like when the sense of your body starts to really inform your consciousness, it's like it transforms your whole consciousness. It transforms your thinking, because this vast sense of lack and of neediness, of needing stuff from the outside, starts to diminish, because when you can feel your back as part of your day-to-day, moment-by-moment awareness, the neediness starts to drop off. I consider myself as having been very needy for a lot of my life, often covering it over in not particularly good ways, and controlling sometimes in relationships, or rescuing in relationships, and this kind of thing. And the more I start to feel my back, and particularly my lower back, the neediness just starts to drop off, to the point where I'm like, well, should I go out and socialize today, or can I be bothered, or whatever, a little bit. And I actually get kind of worried, am I just going to be just too much on my own, but it's a journey, it's a journey. But feeling the back, I think I've underestimated that in my time in the past. Let's have a look. Another question: do any of Lowen's books lay out the principles of bioenergetics? Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask. I've read about 4 or 5 of Lowen's books, and he certainly has one where he has quite a few exercises in it, the way to vibrant health or something like that. But of the others, I don't know if he really lays it out. He's done about 15, like I say, so you could just check through there. Carlos: besides feeling the back, I'd add feeling the lower body. Yeah. Well, the lower body was always, for me, that was more obvious to me, like that was something I needed to achieve, and particularly feeling my belly. And I still, when I'm doing my Reiki and breath work in the morning, I see I'm kind of bouncing off this level of energy in my belly and kind of coming out of it a little bit and stuff like that. But, feeling the back, I've been aware for a long time I don't feel my back. I was in a therapy group some 15 years ago, even longer, I think, and the workshop leader afterwards, she'd come up to me from behind. I was assisting or something, I can't really remember. But she said, you should have been able to feel me when I came up like that. And I thought, shit, I really don't feel my back. And, it was like quite a light bulb kind of moment, and quite a concern for me. And, it is a journey to feel the back again. We're just so, I don't know, I've been so conditioned to just be concerned about how I'm projecting myself from the front, socially, and just not feeling my back. And there is this immense, or for me, gradual relaxation that comes when I start to stop being too concerned about how I appear or what I do, try not to totally let myself go to seed, but feeling my back, it's not, it informs our consciousness of so much. It's like, whoa, if you had 100 people and 50 of them could suddenly just feel their back totally, I mean, they'd probably just fall asleep on the spot and relax, and they would just be so unconcerned about so much stuff that we get so kind of neurotic about, as I see it. The lower body, it's very true, Carlos, it's also the case. I can recall as a kid, before and after I felt my back. Tough to do organically now. Yeah, it's like, that's it, Even just doing little meditations, like where you feel into different points on your back, on your spine, starting from like, around the either up in the occipital point and going down, or in the, what do they call that point at the bottom? I can't quite remember now, but from like the tailbone and lower back, middle back, upper back, neck, and occipital point. It's like just spending a minute sitting and feeling to each. It can be really quite a powerful experience once it gets going. And certainly my lower back was always the tricky bit. That's where I'm like, can't really feel anything there, on the spine and the lower back. And now I can feel more there, and I'm sure there's a great deal more to feel, but I feel happy about that. Pelvic release exercises are ones where you get the pelvis really bouncing up and down in a kind of spontaneous manner, which, it takes a while to get the pelvis kind of confident enough to go into that bouncing mode, for the mental control to slacken off. It's good to spend like half an hour, 40 minutes preparing for that with some different breath and movement exercises. But I regularly lead that, and then people are like afterwards, like, what the fuck was that? Their pelvis just took over for at a certain point, and for 20 minutes, it just bounced like crazy. And their mind, was like, well, this feels pretty good, but I don't actually know what the fuck is happening, And it's fascinating to see, and that starts to open up. That definitely usually starts to open up some feeling in the lower back. These techniques are very, very powerful. Okay. What else have I been busy with apart from the back? Well, you have a YouTube video with wall sit and crucifix bow for emotional release, and you say that after a while, the pain wall sit transforms to just energy. Please say more about this. Yeah. I mean, I've had that experience, certainly. I used to do these kind of 5 or 10 minute wall sits, because it's quite a strong posture wall sit, particularly if you do it with your upper legs horizontal and that kind of thing. But something to understand is that we have sensations in our body, and then our mind kind of labels them. And there is a range of sensations, from love to pain to anger. But there's also a part where where it is just energy being understood in a slightly different manner, and I don't think you can reframe it totally. But certainly, I don't know with a wall sit, maybe I said it for that, but there's definitely a part where I'm aware, I've been in a kind of track in my mind with a sensation. And when I just really forget about that thought pattern and just aim right for the center of the sensation, it can turn into energy. That is like, or it no longer has some, complex story attached to it. It's just in the feeling. Consciousness is kind of merged with the feeling. It's actually merged with it, and you're just in it. And that's probably the best description I could give. It's definitely useful as you get into the bio or the Reichian work, because, I often find like, I can just sit down and I'm a bit stressed or I'm working a bit much or whatever. And I just start to feel my body, and there's like an extra layer of energy. My mind has somewhere been pushing away, and I can actually pull it in, or not really pull it in, but just expand my awareness to encompass it. And it's quite an amazing experience, really. I still have some very strong rigid patterns, and like I'm so used to just closing my energetic field, my kind of sensory emotional field down to be functional, and then opening it up again is quite incredible. So there definitely is a thing where, you can't fully reframe emotions, in my opinion. Some NLP people will probably tell you can. It's up to them. I don't think it's so valid, but there's definitely times when we get stuck in a pattern or avoiding certain feelings, and we don't even really consider what are they, because so much is mediated unconsciously. Hopefully that's somehow just helpful. It's just about feeling into stuff, really, and trying to drop any story that's attached to it. Carlos, as a guy in my 20s, I dissociate mostly through digital distractions. Any advice to stop this? Well, I mean, it happens through different ways, I guess, that people stop it. Either something in their life just gets so fucked up, they think, Jesus, I really need to stop this shit. Or the digital distractions break down or something. Here in Tbilisi, we have power cuts every now and again. That's kind of handy. But I think at the end of the day, what works is to be a bit disciplined with it, to say, okay, I'm into my phone. I like to play on it a bit. Okay, now I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to play on my phone, just scroll and do jack shit for like, on Twitter or whatever. And I'm going to do that for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to do some bioenergetics, or then I'm going to do something else. You have to kind of somewhere get a bit more rigid with your schedule and get some control over it. Because there's a secondary problem with getting too hooked into digital distractions, as you so eruditely put it, and that is that if to your own mind you appear to be addicted to something, your self-esteem will probably go down, unfortunately. It's like, fuck, I spent the whole day staring at Instagram again, or TikTok, or whatever, and it's like, I don't want to be doing this shit, I've got other things to do. I want to work on myself. I want to meditate more, whatever. And I spent the whole fucking day. It's like we inevitably, on some level, beat ourselves up when we do these kind of things. So it's like we have to take, and then of course when you don't do it, when you say, okay, I did my 15 minutes, now I'm going to do something, positive for me, nourishing for me, good for me, whatever it is, and then you feel good because you don't feel like you're, for me, I don't feel like I'm just totally kind of like controlled by a machine somewhere, by a phone or something, It's not a good feeling, and it will lower self-esteem, any kind of self-belief. And, as a guy starting to open up and come out and explore stuff, it's like you're one of the few who, wants to do this kind of work, who wants to look inside and see what's going on. So, finally, you just have to find a practical and intelligent way that works for you to get off it. What some people will go for is, to go on a complete digital detox. That can work, but the same as with fasting, usually it's a good thing to do. But as a way to stop being on things, I don't know that it's so good, because most people will just go back and binge a bit when they get off. And the detox, the digital detox, dopamine detox, whatever, is still a good thing. But nevertheless, it's not, it's just to be having a good level of expectation about what it will achieve. It probably won't get you off forever, And another aspect of this is not to make totally unrealistic expectations of yourself. We're living in a digital screen-based age. I work a lot of the time on computer. I'm starting to work more in person post-COVID, but I work a lot of time on computer. That's my reality right now. So beating myself up for doing it, that's not a very constructive thing to do. So it's like, if you catch yourself doing that, you just have to get a bit more rational and say, okay, I want to have a bit of fun, laze around and just scroll through bullshit on Instagram or whatever, but I'm not going to spend all day doing it, and put a timer on somehow. I hope that's useful, Carlos. Thank you for your question. And if anyone else out there has got a question, do feel free to put it in. I've got about another quarter of an hour, and then I have to jump on something else. So, I'm happy I can still support people to do this work. I'm happy I can still support people to do this work. There's so much potential inside of people, man. Some people just seem to be able to just take off and go, like maybe 0.1% or something. And then there's another 3 or 4% who, with a bit of support, can take off, get away from like that kind of like, it's like we're all orbiting some kind of sun. We're orbiting this sun, and the sun is just the culture we're immersed in. And it's got, a lot of shit parts and a few good parts. But, maybe 95% of people have no interest in ever, escaping from that orbit, and doing something different with their life. They'll just take what comes from the culture. And then 5% of people probably are. And probably, like I say, a fraction of a percent have got the internal energy, or they react to a crisis. They don't need so much support. They get their energetic speed going up, and they just get away. If you go fast enough around something, you will leave. Some kind of physics thing. And then there's another 4 or 5% who, with a bit of support, with a bit of learning, something can happen. I remember, being in the group room, early 40s, years ago, and something happened. I was at University in Holland. It was a long group, 30-day group. And at some point, I just kind of got it internally, like, I can just fucking change. I've got the power. I can just change. I can actually see what I need to do. I can just walk out of this fucking prison if I want to. And then, of course, that's the challenge. It's like, okay, but do I want to? Prison's nice and safe. I'm always saying I don't want to be in this emotional, social prison, but, it's also kind of warm and cozy and who will I be out there, and blah, 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 blah. So it's like, that's, that I saw it myself, and I did take the steps. And it's like you get that awareness, and once you see that, I needed quite a lot of support for a few years to get me to the point where something just catalyzed inside myself. It wasn't like I was receiving a teaching from someone. I was just doing enough emotional work so that enough stuff moved that I could start to really take in some positivity and move forwards. Cool. Let's get back to being a therapist. Could do bow, shoulder raise, and arch in the morning, and then Reiki and breath work before going to sleep, or do I lose something by not doing them consecutively? Well, you have to, finally, you just have to experiment. The thing with doing this kind of work late at night, I worked it out because we had some sort of survey about 5 years ago with people, and about a third of people reckoned they could do bio last thing at night and still sleep good, and the other 2/3 were like, it just activates too much energy, and then I can't really get to sleep. So it's okay. Why I mentioned, in a video recently and maybe last week about getting into this bow, shoulder raise, and arch before the breath work is because they open the body up. I'm old. You're a lot younger. I'm old. I need to do something to get my energy moving in the morning, to open up my throat, get my diaphragm moving, get the area between my shoulder blades a bit open, and then I can get a lot more benefit from doing Reiki and breath work. So I could just jump in and do the breath work, but I'm noticing that doing a bit of preparatory work is worth the investment. So that's what it's about for me. Now, you may be a bit different, so you just have to experiment a little bit and give it a go. Feel free to come back in and let me know, because I'm always interested. Patrick, what would you recommend for people needing to work on self-esteem and being able to stand up for themselves? As someone who does powerlifting, I've achieved a very big but often stiff body. Yeah, I mean, it is often the case sometimes with bodybuilders or guys who hang out in the gym a lot. But it's good to go to the gym. I go to the gym every day. I just do a brief workout, but and I don't have huge, great biceps, But part of what motivates some of those guys, having worked in the group room with them, was on a child level, they suffered some quite bad wounding, from dad or whatever. They got battered around a bit, either physically or emotionally. And then somewhere inside, it's like, I'm going to build myself up and no one's going to fuck with me again, and they create this powerful front. But of course, the wounding is still underneath. So I don't know if that has any meaning for you personally, but it's something you can reflect on a little bit. But self-esteem, it's a little bit like Carlos was talking about the phone. At the end of the day, you just need to do shit which you respect in other people. It's simple as that. If you don't respect someone who lives on their phone all day, then don't do it yourself. If you respect someone who goes to the gym and takes care of themselves, then do it. If you respect someone who talks up, and speaks when they need to speak, just practice doing it. Just practice. You can go to things like, Toastmasters is popular in some countries, and just learn to talk in front of loads of people. It takes a lot of social anxiety away. You just get experience. It's like old style behavioral therapy. So look, what do you respect in people? Who's the person you want to be? Make it practical and grounded, and then say, okay, what are the steps I can take towards getting those attributes for myself? Maybe they dress good. They look really good when they go out, Okay, so then you're going to do it yourself. At the end of the day, self-esteem is just like a muscle, man. It's just like a muscle. You just work it. You work it, and eventually it starts to come. That's how I see it. It's not a magic bullet. Sometimes, and something else to understand is that low self-esteem is a defense. It's not some big psychological drama about your bloody mother or something. And I'm not talking personally about you. I'm talking about people in general. It's not some big drama, emotional drama. It's a defense. It's a way, if we keep small, if you keep your head down like this, like in the trenches in World War I, if you keep down, you don't take a risk. When you stand up and speak up, you take a risk. People might push back. You might upset people. So that's the first bit of understanding to get. Low self-esteem is a defense. That's like, it's a defense. I'm protecting myself with that low self-esteem. And maybe there's some validity in that protection. You've got to look. I hope that's useful. Kristen, How do you deal with others projecting their anger at you? I feel it might be my rejected anger, been doing the right to exist XOJ for a month, but it's near 24/7 experiences. Okay. Well, what I've discovered personally is that once you really are clear with anger, people tend not to fuck with you. You don't have to go around getting angry so much, but there's a clarity that surrounds you because people who dump anger on you, people who are a bit bullies, those guys are not gonna, they look for someone to bully, they look for someone in the workplace, social relationships, whatever. They look for someone who they instinctively feel is going to take the shit that they're going to dump on them. They don't go to someone. So if people are constantly projecting their anger on you, and that's really happening, they're getting pissed off with you, then you need to yourself get more clear with anger and work with anger. Get to a position where you can really scream and shout in a social setting, like in a therapy group. There's a work I did for a long time, myself doing therapy, and then the first 5 years as a therapist, I was just leading anger groups, to be quite honest. And once you're clear with anger, then you have an inner clarity. You can say no quite easily. You don't, when people who've got blocked with anger try to say no, it's like in their mind, like the shit's been going on for a while and they're building it up, and it's like that guy at work, and it's almost like you need to go to DEFCON 1, like you need a nuclear weapon with you to kind of, dump on this fucking dude who's been giving you shit at work and something like that. And when you're confident with it, that's a sign that there's a lot held inside your own being. If you experience that, this going round in the mind with like, I should have said something, and this guy is just giving me these stupid comments or whatever it is, And it's a sign, you just need to work with the anger more, or just practice just being clear. Just practice sometimes just saying no. Find a social situation where you just say no, instead of like some people beat around the bushes. It's like they can't just say no. They have to kind of, oh, well, I'd really like to, but, I've got this. And you can just say no. You don't have to be mean with it, but just look for social situations there where you can just practice saying no. That would be my advice. I hope something can move. Patient miscreant. I've had a huge amount of buried grief in the past 2 years, losing my brother. Wow, father and dog in a short amount of time. I was numb for the first 18 months, barely thinking or feeling at all. I've recently begun to experience shaking waves, mainly through my stomach. It feels embarrassing and a bit unnerving. Any thoughts or exercises? Channel my... Well, it certainly sounds like, that is the grief stored in your body trying to start to move and come out, to like, and you just have to look. There will be a huge amount of sadness inside. It's inevitable if you've lost your brother, your dad, and your dog in a short amount of time, and it's like, I would also recommend, if there's any way, you can to get and see a therapist, talking therapy, where you can just start to talk about stuff. It's like, if there's any way you can, that will help. Having someone you can talk to will help. And in a sense, when we've repressed our emotions a lot, there's a lot of fear around doing that. And sometimes people come to bioenergetics or body-based therapy to avoid the talking component. And whilst it's not always the case that you need to talk, if you're avoiding talking, that also is kind of not really working. At some point you have to just speak and just try to speak about your feelings. And even if it feels like nothing's going to come, just to carry on speaking, because the mind will start to unravel it. So that's something I would really recommend. Find someone that you can just sit down and talk to about it, about these events, and just give it some space. You might not know what to say, you might go around, but try to just keep talking for like 5 minutes with someone listening and just see where it goes. See if you can get into it and something wants to come out. Otherwise, I think just, bow and arch is good. Any kind of breath work practices are good for grief generally. They start to move things, belly breathing, rebirthing, stuff like that can be very, very useful, just to get lying down in that position and then start to work with breathing with your belly. It'll definitely start to move things. Spending time just feeling your body. Because you see, when trauma happens, what really happens is our sense of the body shuts down. It shuts down. So maybe previously we could feel our body more, and it shuts down, and suddenly we can only feel a little bit of our body. So, anything which can re-expand that, because all those feelings which are suppressed are embedded in the sense of a body, but they're in the bits which are kind of in the like forbidden zone the mind has created. So we just have to slowly expand how much we can feel. Slowly expand the amount we can feel, and then bit by bit, the feelings and the energy and the repressed stuff will come out. But man, I feel for you. That's a terrible thing to go through. It's a terrible thing to go through. Thank you for writing in. Thanks for doing this, Dave. Really appreciate it much. No problem. I'm happy I can be of service. If you're watching still and you've got a question, got about 5 minutes, so do just put it out. It's great to have, it's interesting with body-based therapy because often, it's kind of funny how it goes, but there certainly is a class of person, I wrote about it recently, who just wants to work with physical sensations. They want to do psychology, but they just want to work with the physical sensations and tensions. And I've been like this as well. They're afraid to go into the emotions, and they're afraid to go into the stories. It's like they don't want to talk about the relationship with the parents, stuff that hurts, stuff like that. It's more like, oh, I've got this tension in my belly. I know it's psychological. How can I make it go away? And it's good to recognize that's you're still kind of on just a purely functional level, and the reward of going deeper into your own inner world is great. It's like there's a huge potential reward in doing the work, but because at times it just looks like darkness and like, I don't want to face this shit and whatever, we spend so much time in a kind of waiting room inside ourselves somewhere, and it's tragic, it is tragic. Hey, Sol, thanks for tuning in, man. So great, you're really, really getting into the bio these days. Patrick Chisday has been doing bio several years, and it's great. All this information is being shared. Cool, man. Thank you for writing in. Okay, a couple more minutes if anyone's got something they want to bring up. Therapy is good. It was exciting in the old days when I was doing a lot of therapy, because there'd be like 50, 100 people in workshops. It would be crazy. No one was going to sleep. There's all sorts of dating and crazy stuff going on. And you'd have big parties as well, once you finish doing all this screaming and shouting and staying up forever. It was just a really fun, wild kind of scene, And what was so cool was it's provided so much kind of social kind of stuff, and such a great way to meet people, exciting different people who were into taking risks as well. It created this whole scene, and then people got drawn into the scene, turned on by the scene, and then they ended up doing loads of therapy. One of my best friends in the UK, he only came along to one group because his mate was doing it, and his mate told him about it, and his mate kind of gave up quite quickly, but he ended up doing all the training with me for 5 years, and then we're still really good friends now. It's like the friendships that I made in that time from all that intense experience with people who saw me in all the kind of grungy states inside myself that I would prefer to hide. It creates an immense intimacy. It's such an incredible thing. Therapy when it's good, group therapy when it's good, it's such an incredible scene. I just hope somewhere it can really start to take off again. Anyway, 1 more minute. Could have a little bit of a. Would you say Barnagetics Reich's breathwork is like tribal drum? It's like modern shamanism. I play some tribal drums while doing bio. Yes, it's got shamanic elements to it. Definitely. And it performs a similar function. Sometimes, because I lived in a spiritual community like 17 years, living there, and sometimes there'd be a lot of spiritual shamanic people there, and sometimes. I had to stop people sometimes from bringing in their talking stick and their crystals and shit. It can go, for me personally, it can go a little bit too far, where it goes into spiritual bypassing sometimes. But, then you have to come back and be just real about your feelings and stuff. But, yeah, for sure, there are definitely shamanic components in there. Certainly, when you track bioenergetics back to the South Americans, in Brazil and Argentina a bit, I think, and maybe Chile. You know, there's a lot of fusion with shamanic stuff. I haven't done enough work tracking that stuff down, but some people even say that Inuit, you know, some Indian tribe, Native American tribe somewhere north, I think, were into bio as well. I've never tried to track any of these things down. Not easy to do so. But cool, man. Yeah, a bit of tribal drums. Nice. Thank you. I feel grateful I found your page. I've been avoiding talk therapies. It feels so intimate, but I may give it a proper go following your advice. Appreciate it. Cool, man. I hope it works out. Can ask questions here. I'm sorry, I'm closing the stream now because I've got to do something else, but I'll be back next week, 3 o'clock UK time, 10 a.m. New York City time. So just tune in then, Yuri, and you can ask questions. No worries. Cool. Crystals are an attempt to materialize energy in a rigid form. Yeah, maybe. Do I know Joe? Well, I know quite a few people called Joe. You have to give me a bit more info, but trouble is I've got to leave because I'm on another thing. So, Joe, okay. Cheers. Goodbye, everybody. I will see you again next week.